If we need you in Chicago tomorrow morning, can you go? Graham Mercer had prepared for questions about budgets, emergency shutdowns, angry clients, and crews working 12-hour shifts. He had not prepared for the picture that appeared in his head. His 14-year-old daughter, Tessa, standing alone at their kitchen counter before school. Outside the conference room windows, late January snow drifted across downtown Minneapolis. Graham rested one hand on his worn leather portfolio. Vivian Cross sat at the far end of the table. At 45, the billionaire CEO of Northstar Infrastructure Technologies had the calm expression of someone accustomed to receiving clear answers. Graham could have said yes. He needed this job badly enough to feel the answer in his chest. 3 years of local contracts had kept the rent paid, mostly, but stability was becoming harder to fake. Just that morning, Tessa had found him comparing 2 bills over coffee and quietly asked, "We okay?" He had smiled. "We're okay." Parents could make 2 words carry a lot of debt. Before we go further, how old are you? Where are you watching from? And have you ever had to choose between an opportunity and someone who depended on you? Vivian waited. Graham finally said, "No." One interviewer glanced down at his notes. Vivian leaned forward. "No. If tomorrow means tomorrow, with no warning, I can't promise that." The recruiter reminded him that the regional response manager position required unpredictable travel during the first 6 weeks. Graham already knew. He had read the posting until nearly midnight. Still, knowing something on a screen was different from hearing it spoken as a condition. After Lauren died 3 years earlier, Graham had made himself a promise. Tessa would never have to wonder whether her remaining parent was coming home. He did not explain that. He simply nodded. "Then I understand." The interview continued, but something had changed. 20 minutes later, the recruiter carefully confirmed what Graham already knew. His availability did not meet an essential requirement. Graham thanked everyone. No argument. No plea for an exception. By the time he stepped outside, the wind had sharpened. He pulled on his dark winter coat and headed across the snowy plaza toward the curb. Failed interview. Another contract tomorrow. Keep moving. That was what responsible fathers did, Graham told himself. They absorbed the disappointment before it reached the kid. He was almost at the crosswalk when someone shouted behind him, "Mr. Mercer." Graham stopped. The glass doors of North Star swung open. Vivian Cross came running across the plaza in office shoes, one hand holding the door badge she had apparently forgotten to remove. She wasn't even wearing a coat. Graham stared at her. Vivian slowed several feet away, breath visible in the freezing air. "Before you leave," she said, "I need to ask you one more question." Graham tightened his grip on the portfolio. "The interview is over." "I know." "Then why are you running after me?" For the first time that morning, Vivian Cross didn't have an immediate answer. Vivian looked down at her bare arms as if she had only just noticed the temperature. "Can we at least do this inside?" Graham glanced toward the North Star lobby. "I have to pick up my daughter at 3:30. It's 11:15. Then you've got a few minutes." Vivian studied him, then nodded. "Your interview scores were the highest I've seen for this role." Graham's expression barely changed. "Except for availability." "Yes. Which means I'm not qualified for the job you actually have." "That's not exactly what I said. It's what your recruiter said." Vivian folded her arms against the cold. "You handled the emergency response scenario better than 2 candidates who already manage regional teams. You identified the subcontractor bottleneck before anyone prompted you. Then I asked one question about travel, and you shut the door yourself. I answered honestly. You didn't ask whether there was flexibility. You told me unpredictable travel was essential." "It is." "Then we agree." Vivian exhaled, visibly frustrated. "What if we gave you 48 hours notice whenever possible?" "Whenever possible isn't a plan. We could arrange backup childcare." Graham's face tightened. "No, North Star has resources. We could cover this. Isn't about paying somebody to watch my kid." Vivian stopped. Graham lowered his voice. "My daughter's 14. She can make herself dinner. She can stay home for a few hours. That's not the point." "Then what is?" For a moment, he considered walking away. Instead, he said, 3 years ago, her mother died. There were months when Tessa never knew who was picking her up, where I'd be, whether we were spending another night at the hospital. I promised her that part was over." Vivian's expression changed. Not pity. Something closer to understanding. "I'm sorry." Graham nodded once. "Thank you. We can still work around that." There it was again. The solution, Vivian continued, scheduled travel blocks, transportation support, maybe a temporary adjustment during onboarding. If childcare isn't the issue, we can identify what is. Graham stared at her. You really don't like problems you can't fix, do you? Vivian blinked. I run a company with 12,000 employees. Fixing problems is most of my job. I'm not one of your problems. I didn't say you were. You ran into the snow without a coat because a candidate walked away. That should tell you, I think this conversation matters. It tells me you're not used to hearing no. That landed. A black SUV had pulled up near the curb, but Graham ignored it. Vivian's voice became quieter. I'm trying to keep a good candidate from disappearing because of one requirement. And I'm trying to tell you that requirement affects somebody besides me. Your daughter. Yes. Have you asked her? Graham frowned. Asked her what? What she thinks. His answer came immediately. I'm her father. That wasn't my question. Something hardened behind Graham's eyes. You met me 40 minutes ago. You're right. So don't tell me how to raise my daughter. Vivian looked as though she wanted to answer, then stopped herself. Graham adjusted the portfolio under his arm. I came here for a job. I failed the requirement. I can live with that. I could reopen the interview. I'm not asking you to hire me. Graham, what I don't need is someone redesigning my daughter's life because I looked good on a scorecard. For several seconds, only the wind moved between them. Then Graham stepped toward the curb. Vivian didn't follow this time. He had gone several yards when she called after him, not loudly. You were right about one thing. Graham turned. I tried to solve your answer before I understood it. He waited. Vivian gave a small nod. I'll stop. Graham said nothing and walked away. Behind him, Vivian remained in the snow, finally accepting that all the resources in the world could open a door. They could not make someone walk through it. By the time Graham picked Tessa up from school, he had already decided how much of the truth she needed to hear. Not all of it. She climbed into the passenger seat wearing a navy winter coat, knit hat, and the tired expression of a freshman who had spent 7 hours pretending algebra mattered more than lunch. Well? She asked before closing the door. Graham pulled away from the curb. It wasn't the right fit. Tessa looked at him. That sounds like adult language, for they said no. A smile escaped him. Something like that. Was the interview bad? No. Actually, it went pretty well. Then what happened? The travel requirement didn't work. Tessa was quiet for a second. Oh, that single word made Graham tighten his hands around the steering wheel. He changed the subject. How was your science quiz? She groaned dramatically, and he let her complain all the way home. He never mentioned Vivian running after him. That evening, Graham opened his laptop at the kitchen table while Tessa worked on homework nearby. Rent was due the following week. The utility bill was higher than expected, and one of his regular contracts had cut its maintenance hours. He accepted 2 overnight service calls and a short warehouse systems job for Thursday. It wasn't glamorous. It was work. At 9:17 p.m., an email appeared. From Vivian Cross. Graham stared at the name before opening it. The message was short. You were right. I tried to solve your answer instead of listening to it. If you ever want to finish the conversation, the invitation is open. No offer. No salary number. No pressure. Graham read it twice, then closed the laptop without replying. 3 days later, he was standing inside a distribution warehouse in Bloomington, wearing steel-toed boots and an insulated work jacket, while an irritated site supervisor pointed at a control panel. We upgraded the monitoring system Monday. Since then, Zone 4 keeps throwing false shutdown alerts. Graham crouched beside the cabinet. Who installed it? North Star subcontractor. Graham paused. Of course. He examined the logs, then walked the floor with one of the technicians. The equipment itself was fine. The problem appeared only when 2 ventilation units cycled within seconds of each other. You've got a sequencing issue, Graham said. The technician frowned. Software? Not exactly. He pointed toward the sensor network. The new system is reading an old relay response like a second fault. Somebody mapped the upgrade without accounting for the delay in the existing hardware. They tested his theory. The false alert disappeared. Graham could have stopped there. Instead, he spent another hour documenting the sequence so the same problem wouldn't return during the next update. Before leaving, the supervisor asked, You work for North Star? No, you should. Graham gave a tired laugh. Apparently, I don't travel enough. That night, he came home after Tessa was asleep. A plate covered in foil waited in the refrigerator with a sticky note. Dad, pasta. Don't eat the garlic bread cold like a psychopath. Graham smiled. Then he noticed another note beneath it. Also, you missed my call. His smile faded. He checked his phone. 2 missed calls. Nothing urgent. Tessa had texted afterwards saying she was fine. Still, Graham stood alone in the kitchen staring at the screen. He had rejected a job because he wanted to be available for his daughter. Then he had taken enough local work to miss her call anyway. For the first time, the contradiction bothered him. Across town, the warehouse incident report entered Northstar's system. By morning, Vivian Cross was reading it. Halfway down the page, she stopped at the name of the contractor who had identified the sequencing failure. Graham Mercer. Vivian leaned back in her chair. This time, she didn't reach for the phone. 2 days passed before Vivian contacted Graham again. She did not mention the interview. Instead, her email contained a copy of the Bloomington incident report and one question. Would you be willing to explain how you found this? Graham considered ignoring it. Then he remembered the warehouse supervisor saying the same failure could have shut down an active loading zone during peak hours. Pride was one thing. Preventing another bad installation was another. He agreed to a 30-minute call. Vivian joined without an executive team, recruiter, or lawyer. Just her, a notebook, and coffee. Graham explained the sequencing problem. The upgrade wasn't bad, he said. The planning was incomplete. Somebody designed around the new equipment without respecting what was already there. Vivian wrote that down. What would you have done differently? Talk to the people maintaining the old system before designing the new one. That's simple. Simple isn't the same as easy. Vivian looked up. Graham continued. Companies like yours build procedures for ideal conditions. Real sites aren't ideal. People call in sick. Equipment is 20 years old. Weather closes roads. Families have emergencies. Vivian gave him a knowing look. Families. Graham leaned back. Don't. I wasn't going to say anything. You were thinking it. I'm learning that apparently I'm not allowed to solve every thought I have. That surprised a laugh out of him. For the first time, the conversation felt less like an interview. Vivian asked whether he would review several recent field response failures as an independent consultant. 3 weeks. Mostly local. No promise of employment afterward. Graham hesitated. What's the catch? You tell us what we're doing wrong. And if the answer is something you don't like, then I'll try very hard not to run into the snow. He smiled despite himself. The consulting fee would cover more than the patchwork jobs he had scheduled for the same period. More importantly, the work was something he was actually good at. I'll look at the scope. That evening, Graham placed the contract beside his laptop. Tessa wandered into the kitchen wearing sweatpants and an oversized school hoodie. What's that? Consulting project. With the company from the interview? Graham looked at her. Yeah. I thought you said it wasn't the right fit. It wasn't. This is different. She picked up the first page. 3 weeks. Mostly here. Mostly. Graham gently took the contract back. I've handled it. Tessa's expression shifted. She didn't argue. Okay. Graham mistook her silence for relief. The next morning, he signed. At Northstar, Vivian received the confirmation and deliberately resisted the urge to redesign the project around Graham's family situation. At Graham's kitchen table, however, a smaller problem had already begun. He believed protecting Tessa meant carrying every difficult decision himself. And Tessa was beginning to notice that being protected often meant being the last person consulted. For the next week, Graham divided his time between Northstar's field reports and the kitchen table at home. The work suited him. He could spot patterns buried beneath technical language because he had spent years standing beside the people who actually had to make systems work at 2 in the morning. Vivian asked questions. More importantly, she had started waiting for the answers. They disagreed often. Graham thought Northstar relied too heavily on procedures written by people far from the job site. Vivian thought Graham sometimes treated every corporate process like it had been invented specifically to annoy him. Neither was entirely wrong. At home, however, Graham still made decisions the old way. One Thursday evening, Tessa borrowed his laptop because hers was installing an update. I just need to print my history paper, she called from the kitchen. Go ahead. Graham was folding laundry in the hallway when the printer started. Then it stopped. Dad, something in her voice made him look up. Tessa was sitting at the kitchen table with the laptop open. Vivian's email was on the screen. Graham froze. Tessa looked from the message to him. You said the interview didn't work out. It didn't. She ran after you? Graham put down the towel in his hands. Tess, she tried to reopen the conversation. It wasn't that simple. Tessa scrolled. Her face changed as she read Vivian's apology. You told me they said no. I told you it wasn't the right fit. That's not the same thing. No, it's not. Why didn't you tell me? Graham pulled out the chair across from her. Because you didn't need to worry about it. Tessa gave a short, disbelieving laugh. There it is. What? That thing you do. What thing? You decide what I need to know, then you tell me everything's fine. Graham felt himself becoming defensive. I'm your father. Some things are mine to handle. But this was about me. It was about the travel, which you said no to because of me. Because I have responsibilities. To me. Yes. Tessa stood. So you turned down a good job because you decided I couldn't handle you traveling? I didn't turn down a job. I didn't meet the requirement. But she tried to talk about options. Tessa, you were 11 when your mom died. The words came out harder than he intended. The room went quiet. Graham softened his voice. You remember those months. The hospital. Different people picking you up. Sleeping at Aunt Rachel's. Calling me and not knowing when I'd be home. Of course I remember. I promised you we weren't going back to that. Tessa's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. I'm not 11 anymore. That doesn't mean you should have to organize your life around my job. And you shouldn't organize your whole life around me. That's different. Why? Because I'm your dad. Tessa wiped at one eye, frustrated that she was crying. You keep saying that like it ends the conversation. It means protecting you is my responsibility. Protecting me from what? From having to wonder if I'm coming home. But I know you're coming home. You can't know that. Graham heard the sentence only after he had said it. For 1 second, Lauren's hospital room seemed closer than the kitchen. Tessa heard it too. Her anger softened, but it didn't disappear. This isn't just about me, she said. Graham looked away. You're scared. I'm careful. No, Dad. You're scared something will happen if you're not here. That's not fair. Neither is making every decision for both of us and calling it protecting me. Graham stood. I chose you. I will always choose you. Tessa shook her head. That's the problem. He stared at her. You keep saying you chose me. Her voice broke. But you never asked me. Graham had no answer. Tessa closed the laptop and walked toward the hallway. Halfway there, she stopped. I don't care if you become some big executive. I don't care how much money you make. I just don't want to grow up thinking every opportunity you lost was because of me. Tessa, and I don't want you using me as the reason you're afraid to try. Her bedroom door closed quietly. Not slammed. Somehow that hurt more. Graham remained at the kitchen table. The contract lay beside the laptop. Next to it was the calendar where he had written Tessa's school events, appointments, pickup times, and everything else he had spent 3 years carefully controlling. He had believed sacrifice meant carrying the difficult choices so his daughter wouldn't have to. Now, for the first time, he wondered whether he had been carrying them for her or taking them away from her. The next morning, Graham found Tessa at the kitchen counter eating cereal in silence. He poured coffee and sat across from her. I owe you an apology. Tessa looked up. Graham resisted the instinct to explain himself first. You were right. I made decisions that affected both of us without asking what you thought. She pushed a strawberry around her bowl. I know you were trying to help. That doesn't make it fair. Tessa studied him, almost suspicious of how quickly he had admitted it. So what happens now? I don't know. That answer felt strange coming from him. For 3 years, Graham had treated uncertainty like an emergency. If he planned enough, checked enough, stayed close enough, maybe nothing could surprise them again. I want to try something different, he said. When something affects both of us, we talk before I decide. Tessa raised an eyebrow. Like normal people? Let's not get carried away. She smiled. It was small, but it was enough. Later that morning, Graham met Vivian at North Star to review his findings. He had identified the same weakness across 4 field incidents. North Star's response system depended too heavily on individual managers being physically present. When one person became unavailable, decisions stalled. Vivian studied the diagrams spread across the conference table. You're recommending smaller regional teams with shared authority. I'm recommending you stop building systems around one person being indispensable. Vivian glanced at him. Graham noticed the irony too. Yeah, he said. I heard it. She smiled, but didn't rescue him from the realization. He continued. Every site needs a primary lead, a backup who actually has authority, and a handoff process people practice before an emergency. That adds staffing cost. Less than a shutdown. Vivian tapped the page. And you think this works? I think depending on one person for everything eventually breaks the person or the system. This time, neither of them pretended they were only talking about North Star. That evening, Graham brought his calendar to the kitchen table. Tessa sat beside him. There's a site review in Rochester next Tuesday, he said. I'd leave around 6 in the morning and probably be home after dinner. Tessa checked her own calendar. I have debate practice until 5. Aunt Rachel could pick you up. Or Maya's mom. She already drives past here. Graham almost said he would handle it. He stopped. Would you be comfortable with that? Yes. You sure? Dad, right? Asking once. Tessa laughed. They worked through the day together. Transportation, dinner, emergency contacts. Even what happened if weather delayed him. Nothing about the plan was dramatic. That was exactly why it mattered. For years, Graham had believed being a good father meant making himself the strongest point in Tessa's world. Now he was beginning to understand that strength could mean building a world that didn't collapse whenever he stepped away. Before bed, Tessa paused outside his room. Dad, yeah. If you had asked me about that interview, Graham waited. I don't know what I would have said. He nodded. That's okay. But I would have liked being asked. I know. After she disappeared down the hallway, Graham looked at the Rochester schedule on his phone. 4. The first time since Lauren died, leaving home for work did not feel like breaking a promise. It felt like testing a new one. He would still protect his daughter. He just wouldn't confuse protecting her with deciding everything for her. The Rochester trip went better than Graham expected. Not perfectly. A freezing rain warning delayed his drive home by nearly an hour, and his first instinct was to call Tessa and apologize as though he had broken something. Instead, he told her the truth. Roads are bad. I'm going slow. Good, she said. I'd rather have a late dad than a dad in a ditch. When Graham finally walked through the apartment door, Tessa was doing homework at the kitchen table. Nothing had fallen apart. That realization stayed with him. 2 days later, Vivian asked Graham to meet with North Star's regional operations team. The company was preparing a 4-week rollout across several Midwest sites, and his recommendations about backup leadership had changed the project plan. We need someone to oversee the field side, Vivian said. Graham immediately felt the old answer rising. No. Then he looked at the schedule. 3 short trips. Chicago, Des Moines, Madison. I need time to think. Vivian nodded. Of course. Graham waited for the special arrangement, the childcare solution, the executive exception. None came. You're not going to convince me? Vivian almost smiled. I'm trying something new. What's that? Letting you make your own decision. She slid a folder across the table. Inside were the complete requirements. Travel windows, responsibilities, compensation, expected hours, and the things North Star could not change. This isn't a job offer, Vivian said. It's an independent rollout assignment. Procurement is reviewing several contractors. If you want it, submit a proposal. So I compete for it. Yes. And you stay out of the decision? I'm CEO Graham. I'm never completely out of anything. He raised an eyebrow. Vivian sighed. But I won't override procurement. That evening, Graham put the folder on the kitchen table. Tessa looked at it. Bad news. Complicated news. He explained the assignment. Then he did something that still felt unnatural. He stopped talking. What do you think? Tessa blinked. You're asking me? Apparently. That's how conversations work. She smiled. They opened the calendar. Chicago overlapped with a regular school day. Des Moines fell before a science test. Madison was the problem. My winter debate showcase is that Friday, Tessa said. Graham stared at the date. I can tell them I'm unavailable. Tessa shook her head. We're discussing, remember? Right. They worked through possibilities. Aunt Rachel could stay over during 2 trips. Maya's mother could handle 1 pickup. Graham could return before the showcase if the Madison schedule held. And if it doesn't? Tessa asked. Graham hesitated. Then we figure it out when we know what happened. Tessa looked pleased. That sounded almost healthy. Don't spread it around. Over the next 2 nights, Graham built his proposal around something North Star had rarely done. No single field leader would be indispensable. Each site would have a trained deputy with authority to take over. Every major decision would have a documented handoff. He submitted his real availability too. No pretending he could be everywhere. No special treatment. 3 days later, procurement called. His proposal had been selected. Graham sat quietly after the call ended. He had not been rescued. Vivian had not handed him anything. He had competed with boundaries intact and won. Across the kitchen, Tessa noticed his expression. "You got it." Graham nodded. She grinned. Then she pointed at the shared calendar on the refrigerator. "Good. Now write down Chicago before you forget." Graham picked up the marker. For once, moving forward didn't require choosing between being a father and being something else. It required building a life where neither responsibility had to erase the other. The rollout stayed on schedule until Madison. Friday afternoon, freezing rain moved across southern Wisconsin faster than forecast. By 3:30, highways were slick, 2 service crews were delayed, and a power fluctuation knocked one North Star site into emergency mode. Graham stood in the control room watching 3 warning indicators flash across the monitoring screen. His phone buzzed. "Tessa, debate showcase starts at 6:30. Roads look terrible. Don't rush." Graham checked the time. Under the old response plan, he would have stayed. The field lead remained until every system was stable, every report completed, every decision signed. Under the plan Graham himself had designed, that was no longer necessary. "Caleb," he called. The deputy field lead looked over. "You're taking command at 4. Caleb hesitated. "We're still troubleshooting the secondary controller." "I know." "You sure?" Graham almost laughed. Apparently, even other people had become accustomed to one person carrying everything. He walked Caleb through the remaining issues, transferred decision authority in the system, and made sure the entire team knew who was responsible. Then Graham called Vivian. "We've got a weather delay and an unstable secondary controller. Caleb has the handoff." There was a pause. "And you?" "I'm leaving." Another pause. Graham waited for resistance. Instead, Vivian said, "Drive carefully. That's it. You designed the backup structure. Either we trust it or we don't." Graham looked through the window at the icy parking lot. Right. He left at 4:10. 20 minutes later, traffic slowed almost to a crawl. At 5:15, Graham realized he might not make Tessa's showcase. His chest tightened. For years, a moment like this would have triggered the same response. Drive faster, control more, somehow force the world back into the shape he had promised. Instead, he pulled into a gas station parking lot and called her. "I might miss the beginning. I figured. I'm sorry. Dad, stop apologizing for weather. I said I'd be there. And you're trying to get here safely." Graham closed his eyes. "Are you okay?" "Yeah. Nervous." "What are you debating?" "You know what I'm debating." "I know. I'm distracting you. It's not working." He smiled. "Tess." "Yeah. I'm proud of you whether I get there before 6:30 or not." Her voice softened. "I know." He arrived at the school at 6:47. Graham hurried through the hallway, still wearing his work boots and dark winter coat. He reached the auditorium doors just as applause broke out. For one terrible second, he thought he had missed her. Then a student volunteer whispered, "Next group starts in 2 minutes." Graham found a seat near the back. Tessa walked onto the stage moments later. She spotted him almost immediately. Her shoulders dropped. Not because she had been helpless without him, because she was glad he had come. That difference mattered. Afterward, Tessa found him in the lobby. "You made it." "Barely." "How's Madison?" Graham checked his phone. One message from Caleb. "Controller stabilized. Team safe. Full report tomorrow." Graham showed her. Tessa grinned. "Look at that. They survived without you." "Very funny." His phone rang again. "Vivian." Graham answered. "Everything okay?" "More than okay," Vivian said. "Caleb handled the incident exactly the way your plan intended." "Good. There's something else." Vivian explained that North Star's board had reviewed preliminary results from the rollout. Response delays were down. Site managers reported fewer bottlenecks. More importantly, field teams were making decisions without waiting for one exhausted person to approve everything. "They want your model expanded company-wide," she said. Graham looked through the lobby windows at freezing rain shining beneath the parking lot lights. "That's a big change." "Yes. And you're calling me during my daughter's debate showcase." Vivian went silent. Then she laughed. "Apparently I still have work to do." "Tomorrow, Vivian." "Tomorrow." He ended the call. Tessa raised an eyebrow. "The billionaire CEO can wait." Graham put his phone in his pocket. "For tonight." Tessa smiled and started toward the exit. Graham followed beside her. Months earlier, he would have believed this moment proved he had chosen his daughter over work. Now he understood something better. He had not abandoned responsibility in Madison. He had built trust there. He had not rescued Tessa by reaching the auditorium. He had respected her enough to tell the truth when he might be late. And for the first time since losing Lauren, Graham understood that love did not require him to be everywhere. It required him to know when to stay, when to leave, when to trust someone else, and when. Simply showing up was enough. On Monday morning, Graham returned to North Star expecting a conversation about expanding his field model. Vivian surprised him. "I want your recommendation before I tell you mine." They sat in the same conference room where his failed interview had been discussed weeks earlier. This time, there was no panel judging whether Graham fit North Star's idea of the perfect candidate. There were only two people trying to solve a problem. Graham opened his notebook. "The system works because responsibility is shared," he said. "If you expand it, don't turn me into the person everyone waits for again." Vivian leaned back. "So you don't want to lead it?" "I didn't say that. I said leadership and being indispensable aren't the same thing." That distinction changed the conversation. By the end of the meeting, Graham had agreed to help North Star develop the model across its regional operations, but under clear conditions. Travel would be planned rather than treated as a constant emergency. Regional deputies would have real authority. Success would be measured by whether teams could function without waiting for Graham. It was meaningful work, but it was not a rescue. Vivian had opened a door. Graham still had to decide whether to walk through it. Before leaving, he paused beside her office. "There's something I never asked." "What? Why did you run after me that day?" Vivian smiled faintly. "Because you were the first candidate who failed my interview by refusing to pretend your life had no limits." Graham waited. "And," she added, "because you noticed a problem in our field report that people inside this company had missed." "So it wasn't pity." "No, good." Vivian folded her arms. "Would pity have offended you?" "Absolutely. That's one of your less charming qualities." "I have several." "So I've noticed." They both laughed. That evening, Graham and Tessa ate takeout at their kitchen table. The shared calendar was still hanging on the refrigerator, now crowded with school events, work trips, debate practice, and ordinary reminders. Tessa pointed at one date. "You're traveling again?" "2 nights." "You already talked to Aunt Rachel?" Graham shook his head. "Nope." Tessa looked suspicious. "I thought we were planning." "We are. I was waiting for you." She smiled. Together, they worked it out. Nothing about their life had suddenly become easy. Graham was still a single father. Bill still arrived. Weather still ruined schedules. Tessa still needed him, even as she became more capable of standing on her own. And Graham still missed Lauren. But grief was no longer making every decision for him. From the outside, people might tell this story differently. They might say a struggling single dad failed an interview, walked away, and was chased down by a billionaire CEO who changed his life. That version would be easier. It would also miss the point. Money did not make Graham worthy of respect. Vivian's attention did not give him value. A prestigious company did not transform him from an ordinary man into someone important. He had mattered before he entered that building. The warehouse worker mattered. The receptionist mattered. The executive mattered. The exhausted parent counting grocery money mattered. The wealthy CEO sitting behind glass walls mattered too. Human dignity does not rise and fall with a bank balance, a job title, a neighborhood, or the clothes someone can afford. Poor people should never be treated as lesser because they have less. Wealthy people should not be reduced to their wealth either. Every person carries fears, responsibilities, losses, hopes, and a basic need to be treated with respect and compassion. Graham's real victory was not that someone powerful finally noticed him. It was that he stopped measuring good fatherhood by how much of himself he could sacrifice. And Vivian's growth was not learning to reward a deserving man. It was learning that leadership sometimes begins by listening before trying to fix someone else's life. Weeks later, Graham left for another regional visit. At the apartment door, he turned toward Tessa. "Call me if you need me." She smiled. "I know." He nodded and stepped into the cold morning. This time, neither of them treated his leaving as abandonment. And neither needed a billionaire, a miracle, or a perfect ending to understand what they had gained. They had learned to trust each other. That was enough.